Okay, so it's the next day and the Araldite's dried and the pin feels pretty solid on there. So we're ready to put the thing back in. So that's the indicator lens. Like I say, it wasn't too bad really. It was perfectly savable. So just glad that's on there. So when we push it back in, hopefully it won't snap off again, but we'll just see what happens. So first thing you need to do obviously is put the indicator bulb back in. It's just a simple push and twist. It's like a quarter turn sort of thing. So once we got that back in the bottom of that, that's locked in there nice now. So let's try and new torch. Let's see what we're doing. So the arrow piece is now in there. Everything looks good. Pops in. It's now held at the bottom. Just line up for the screw at the top. Obviously you don't want to tighten it too tight because it's a metal screw obviously going into the plastic bush that was pressed into this panel, so quite easy to round those off, but there we are. Didn't cost me anything apart from a bit of glue and one very small brass screw, and now we fixed the problem, no more flappy indicator. Just wanted to make a little video to finish off the chassis work that's been done to it. When I got it there was quite a lot of rust and mud sort of caked on the bottom of it, which I've cleaned off. Unfortunately I haven't got much video of it, but what I'll do is I'll cut in some stills of the photographs that I took of the rust and what I did from there basically. So this first picture shows sort of the amount of rust that I managed to scrape out from underneath the car. So that's now in a nice pile on the floor. The next photograph shows the chassis members and some of the rust that was on it. It's all very difficult to get in there, so basically I cleaned it up the best I could with a wire brush and some sandpaper. Took the worst of the flaky rust off the top of it. I mean, to sort of remove that stuff, ideally you'd end up sort of sandblasting the car or acid dipping it, which would involve a complete strip down. I mean, there's no way you'd get back up and sort of into the underside of some of these sections with a grinder and a flap disc on it. I mean, you just end up destroying half the car, waving it around blindly in sort of pockets of the car, hoping you're removing rust and not good metal. So I mean, from the start, this was always going to be a chemical sort of treatment. So I've used some more built Hamber products, which I'll show you in a different video at the end. Again, that video is going to be from early camera footage from my phone, so please excuse the quality of it. But like I say, once I cleaned it up and got rid of the worst of the rust with a wire brush, I then painted on the built Hamber, so that'll be the next picture that pops up. And that's the sort of treatment you paint on essentially to neutralise rust. And then after that you can then paint it. So I painted it with a high zinc primer, which again prevents corrosion and is a very sturdy coating. Then using a can of spray paint off eBay, I've then painted the rest of it to give it a bit of a top coat. I'm quite impressed with the colour match actually, and I'll try and find some footage now of the finished article. So if we look underneath, I mean, you have to excuse the angle and the light, but that's the finished sort of area of the chassis. It's come up pretty good. I mean, like I say, I've treated and neutralised the rust underneath so it won't come back, and painted it over the top. Like I say, there's very little access in there, and it was dangerous enough trying to get it off with a wire wheel basically. I mean, like I say, you could spend hours and days removing all that sort of stuff, but I just wanted to neutralise it, put it to bed sort of thing, and then we can move on with the more interesting stuff. Those are the two bolts, or two nuts even, that you bolt onto to hold the towing eye in. So I'll show you the towing eyes quickly as well. I'll quick wander over to the desk. These are the two towing eyes. I've already taken these off and cleaned them up a bit. So obviously the different height ones, the shorter one goes on the deeper section and the longer one goes on the shorter section there. And again, wire brush these. I mean, these look like something that would come off of the Titanic. I mean, they were absolutely awful. They're really crusty, quite deep with rust. I'm going to use my friend's sandblaster to remove the worst of the rust on them. And then again painted them with a Built Amber Hydrate 80, which dries to this sort of black finish on them. They say you can leave it as well if you want to, but I mean, I always prefer to paint stuff, so I'll put a quick coat of zinc primer on these, and then colour them body colour before I bolt them back on. So I just thought I'd show you the couple of products that I've used so far on the chassis and on the towing eye hooks. This is the Hydrate 80. It's a rust killer and barrier system, basically, it says. But yeah, it's made by Built Amber, which are obviously quite a large company. It's quite simple. You just sort of scrape off the worst of the rust, paint it on using a brush, paint it on in one direction, and then let it dry for I think it's about half an hour. Obviously follow whatever the instructions say on the side, but then you sort of give it a second coat brushing in the second direction, so you sort of go 90 degrees to the first way, you sort of brush across whatever you're doing, and then you brush sort of along with it, and then that leaves this sort of like blacky purple sort of coating on it, which just says you can leave or then paint over. And I really do rate it. So that's the Hydrate 80 rust killer that I use. And then also this is the Built Amber again, but it's the Electrox, which is a anti-corrosion zinc rich primer. Basically it's a 400ml aerosol can. Goes on nice and thick. You actually get quite a lot of mileage out of one can of it, so it does last quite a long time. Sprayed it up on the chassis, and I've also sprayed it up on the towing eye hooks, which are sitting over here now at the wall on the moment, just going to dry out for a bit. Come on, focus. Apply a second coat after 2 hours and before 3 hours, or wait 96 hours for top coats or finishing coats. Should be applied after 96 hours. So make sure it's obviously cured properly, then you can give it a top coat with our lovely mica bluish, purplish, bluish AK9. It is actually called purplish blue. I'm not making that up. That is the colour that Toyota designated this as, which is the paint code AK9. So that's what colour the car is. Got this one off eBay as usual. So there we go. But obviously with zinc primers and everything and any sort of chemicals, obviously always wear glasses, because you don't want to get this stuff in your eyes. You don't want to breathe it, so put a mask on. Obviously zinc is a heavy metal, you don't want that going in your system because it doesn't come out again, and it's obviously very bad for you. And obviously wear gloves as well, because you don't want it going through your skin, and it is a nightmare to get off as well because it's such a good coating. So those are the things I use. I really do, like I say, I've always used them for years. So yeah, that was the paint I got. It was WLW Auto Paints, and like I say, you just type in the code or pick the code off of the pull down list off of eBay, and they send you this can in the post. Basically, it's really good. They send it obviously without the nozzle attached, so if anything cracks or breaks, it doesn't spray your paint everywhere. And it's one of the better nozzles as well. I don't know if you've seen these before, but basically you can rotate the yellow part of it. It basically sprays out in a fan pattern, so you end up with like a line of paint, almost like well, it's not like the professional guns obviously, but you end up with a line of paint that obviously covers a wider area, rather than just like a sort of like a sphere of paint coming out, like just like a general sort of nozzle spray. Actually comes out in a fan, and you can actually rotate the end of the yellow section on this, and then you can actually use it to spray sort of wider areas up that way, or sort of like widthways across kind of thing, depending on how you want to spray. So yeah, it's maybe the cheapest can I could find off of eBay. It was only like $11.99 including the shipping, which is pretty awesome considering it costs like £3 or £4 to actually post the thing here. And yeah, top quality nozzle on it as well, so yeah, couldn't be happy with that stuff. It's really good. Finished spraying up the towing brackets that I took off. Final coat with that can of spray paint that I showed you earlier that I bought off of eBay. It's actually a pretty decent colour match to the original paint before it got sun faded, so the brackets probably look the best they ever had. And like I say, they're just going to get bolted back on under the car and behind the bumper, so it's doubtful you'll ever see them again. So there we are, but a nice thick coat of that, and just going to let them dry here for the next 24 to 48 hours, and they should be ready to bolt back on again. Okay, so we're going to put the towing brackets back on the car. You might remember I cleaned them up and painted them in an earlier video, and obviously the bolts to put them back in are pretty rusty at the bottom. Being as they're off the car, they won't take that long to clean up with a wire brush, so just remove the worst of the corrosion, because when you put it back in, you can end up damaging the threads that are on the nuts that are fixed to the car, and you can't take the nuts off of the car. They're sort of welded on or sort of clamped on basically at manufacture, so to change them would be a nightmare. What you can do sometimes, if you've got the right taps and dies, you can use that to basically cut the rust out of the threads a bit easier. These bolts unfortunately are a fine pitch thread. They're a M10 by 1.25, whereas the tap and die I've got is an M10 by 1.5, which is the standard thread. I believe these are a fine thread, which is why they're 1.25 instead of 1.5. But if you do have those, that's an easier way of doing it. Just put a little bit of lubrication on it and just run them over by hand, and that'll clear out all of the crap that's in the threads. So now it's time to reattach the tying eye brackets to the underside of the chassis. The keen-eyed amongst you may have noticed that there's actually two different sizes of bracket on this car. The one that goes on the left-hand side is a bit shorter than the one that goes on the right, because the box sections that they attach to on the vehicle are actually different heights. So obviously the small bracket goes on the big box section, the large bracket goes on the smaller box section, and then when they're fitted, they are the same height poking out the bottom of the bumper. Copper greased as they're mild steel, and that should hopefully prevent any corrosion issues in the future, give you half a chance of getting them out. The approximate torque settings for these bolts are to tighten it up until your elbow goes crunch, or until you start to see stars. That's probably the best way to tighten these up. So moving on to the second side now. Not quite sure what I'm struggling with here. Perhaps the exhaust was in the way, but a bit more copper grease and tighten that one up as well. If you unfortunately over tighten it and manage to strip the threads, then that's the perfect time to call your assistant over, hand them the wrench, and then run away. Looks like we've got it, so that's all good. So now we've got the tying brackets bolted back on. There's a little bit of rust spot here. I think it's from where there's obviously been a few biffs into posts where someone's reversed this car into a few bits and pieces, and it's just sort of stretched and cracked the paint there. I have had a look inside and there's no serious damage, so it's not like it's had an accident or anything. It just looks like they're a bit clumsy when they came to parking it. So I'll just sand down this quickly just to take off the worst of the top rust, and then use some more of that Hydrate 80, which will turn what's left of the surface rust into inactive material. Then we'll be able to paint over the top of it, and then that'll be the rear of the car done.